expressing emotions or struggling with your emotions is weakness, and it's not. You're not going to burden somebody else by sharing authentically. Hi, this is Jim Breon. Welcome to this YouTube channel where we discuss all things mental health. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and a licensed professional clinical counselor in Orange County, California. What I'm going to be talking about today is men and their mental health. I think it's something that we still need to raise awareness about men and how they can deal with their mental health. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of stigma around men asking for help when it comes to psychological issues, emotional issues, mental health. So I'm going to talk about what some of those unique struggles are, maybe some barriers that get in the way of a man getting help, some signs that you might be struggling with your own mental health, and some tips for coping. Unfortunately, this stigma still exists, and even though we've made some progress, we still need to work to tear down those barriers that prevent men from getting help when they need it. It's especially hard if the man is also LGBT or Black, Indigenous, or a person of color to get the appropriate kind of mental health with a professional that understands their experience. And unfortunately, as a result of this, there still is what I consider to be a suicide crisis in our country with men. Men are still 4 times higher to actually commit suicide and make up like 80% of all suicides in our country. In the US, there are 35,000 men that kill themselves every year. And when you do the math, that's about 1 every 15 minutes. So there clearly is a crisis that needs to be addressed. Let's look at some of the things that get in the way of a man getting help with his mental health. First of all, it's hard for a man to talk about his feelings. And there's lots of reasons for that. There are all kinds of cultural ideas and gender roles and conditioning that we've all grown up with about asking for help. A lot of us have some very kind of misguided ideas about what it means to be stoic. I think some men think that stoicism means that I just don't have emotions. Stoicism actually isn't about not having emotions. What it's about is it's actually a philosophy that is focused on living the good life, not the pleasure principle. But it doesn't mean stuffing your emotions. But we are conditioned from the time that we're boys with the boy code. And the number one rule of the boy code is never let anybody see that you're weak. And then we start to reinforce that with each other. And we start creating narratives that having emotions or expressing emotions or struggling with your emotions is weakness. And it's not. Men are human and humans have emotions. And we have those for a reason. And understanding them and being able to express them in a healthy way is actually really important. And, guys, if you're struggling with anxiety and depression, that's not a sign of weakness. And it is possible to get help for those things. We're conditioned to be invulnerable performers. In other words, that we can get everything done that needs to be done and nothing ever affects us. The reality is that, men struggle just like everyone else does. And we're conditioned to not ask for help, to not talk about our feelings. It actually takes courage, I think, for a man to start to talk openly and open up. So let's start doing that. Let's start talking about these things, challenging those ideas that it's not okay to ask for help, because it is. And when we internalize some of those patterning and conditioning, it leads men to suffer in silence and shame for what they're feeling, which is basically they're being human. So real men do ask for help. And it can actually be a huge relief that can unburden a man. And I think that's one of the big fears that men have sometimes is that, I don't want to burden somebody else with what's happening for me. But you're not going to burden somebody else by sharing authentically with what you're experiencing. And it's a huge fear that many men have. But often, when I work with a man who learns how to understand what's happening internally and express those things in healthier ways, they tell me that it's a huge relief and they don't feel so alone. When we learn how to suppress our emotions, we end up driving them into the shadow. And that's a dangerous place for our emotions to live. And the more that men suffer in silence, the more they experience isolation. And we need to break that isolation. Unfortunately, in a lot of men, when they're not getting help for their mental health, they struggle with depression, panic disorder, bipolar disorder, just like everyone else. In fact, 90% of new cases of schizophrenia that are diagnosed by the age 30 are diagnosed in men. So it can be helpful to recognize some signs that you might be struggling with your mental health, particularly looking at when you might be dealing with some depression. There are physical symptoms that happen associated with depression, and often because we don't have a language to talk about our emotions, we do somaticize or feel those symptoms of depression physically. And sometimes you might feel a tightness in your chest. You might have problems with your gastrointestinal system. You might have low testosterone or start gaining weight or losing weight unintentionally, or start experiencing ED, erectile dysfunction. Some of the psychological symptoms of depression are trouble concentrating, and of course, if you start having suicidal ideation, that's a real concern and is a sign that you need to get help. You need to talk to somebody. Some emotional symptoms could be sadness. Often in men, depression is masked. In other words, it doesn't look like depression might look in a woman. It often comes across as extreme irritability or anger. You might see a man start to withdraw or become more aggressive. Hopelessness is a sign of depression, and low libido or sex drive can be a sign of depression. And then there are behavioral signs that you might be struggling. Starting to use substances or maybe increasing the use of substances to numb your feelings rather than cope with them because you don't know how to cope with them. Isolating yourself. When we start really falling into bad patterns of workaholism, or obsessions, or start really engaging in lots of extreme escapist behaviors. This is a sign that you might be trying to avoid your emotions rather than learning how to cope with them. If your behaviors start to become controlling, or you start to become violent or abusive, those kinds of behaviors are clear signs that something with your emotional and mental health needs addressing. And when you start engaging in lots of risky behaviors, those can be some signs. So, what are some tips for coping? I think, first of all, for a man to learn how to normalize and validate your own emotions. In other words, tell yourself that it makes sense that I'm feeling this based on what's happening in my life, and recognizing the symptoms when you're struggling. You want to identify your social support system and use it. Find the people who are, safe humans that you can talk to, and make time for friendships. A lot of us, we don't have a lot of close male friendships, and that's something that's important to foster. You want to identify what are your unhealthy coping mechanisms that really look more like numbing behaviors than coping. It can be really helpful to learn some conscious breathing exercises, ways to manage your stress in the moment so that it doesn't build and build and build. Moving your body, exercise is a great way to manage stress and anxiety. And developing some healthy hobbies. And you might even think about reaching out and getting some professional help, talking to a therapist. So how can therapy help? Actually, in lots of ways. It can help you learn how to manage job stress, relationship stress, how to cope with anxiety and depression, how to communicate in more effective ways so that you can communicate what you need in a way that people can hear and you can get your needs met. It can help you develop healthier assertiveness, not aggressiveness, but assertiveness. In other words, asking for what you need. And it can really help you to resolve trauma that might have been untreated for a long time. It can help you learn how to identify with things like obsessive compulsive traits, PTSD, and mood swings. And ultimately, I think therapy can be a way of self-empowering, of empowering yourself, because it can also help you to develop greater meaning and purpose in your life and to live authentically. It can help you be happier and improve your functioning and make you feel more in the moment so that you're more present and you're more mindful. And often therapy can be a way of discovering things about yourself that you had never been aware of, because you don't know what you don't know. And working with a good therapist that you connect with and relate to can really help to reveal different aspects to yourself that maybe you hadn't been aware of before. The reality is that only about a third of men who need help with their mental health get it. And unfortunately, we still hear terribly sad stories about men, athletes, performers, men and boys who commit suicide. And people are struggled to understand how this could happen. And a lot of times it's because we're suffering in silence. And there is a crisis of mental health for men. There's a crisis of suicidality, unfortunately, because we suffer in silence. And each one of those losses is a loss to friends, to family, and to society, because you're needed and you matter. And it doesn't have to be this way. If the videos are helpful, I encourage you to like and subscribe, sign up for notifications, leave some comments and let me know what you think. Start a conversation with people. And until the next time, take care of yourself, take care of one another.